All right, well, let's bring in our fourth speaker to challenge you. And coming to us live from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania from the Hangout is Susan Abuhalwa, who's a prominent Palestinian-American writer, human rights campaigner, and commentator and author of the 2010 internationally best-selling novel Mornings in Jenin. And Susan Abuhalwa, you have the floor either to challenge Nick or to make your own remarks.
Thank you. In 1944, the U.S. State Department said that Middle Eastern oil was, quote, a stupendous source of strategic power and one of the greatest material prizes in world history. That same year, President Roosevelt said to the British ambassador that, quote, Persian oil is yours, we share the oil of Iraq and Kuwait, as for Saudi Arabian oil, it's ours. Of course, no Arab or Persian was invited to that conversation. All U.S. relationships and interventions in the Middle East since then have revolved around this Western sense of entitlement to other people's natural resources, which also exists towards other regions such as Latin America and Africa. Ensuring the free flow of cheap oil meant that Western interventions were driven not by the promotion of freedom, democracy, or human rights, but by the ruthless ethos of dominance and empire, including the removal or assassination of leaders, installation of client regimes, the suppression of nationalist struggles, the propagation of internecine fighting, and the manipulation of nations with threats, aid, and duplicity. The first overthrow of an elected leader by the U.S. in the Middle East was, in fact, in Syria in 1949. A CIA-backed coup then installed Colonel Hosni Zaim, whose first order of business was to approve a previously blocked U.S. oil pipeline project through Syrian territory from Saudi Arabia to the Mediterranean. When Mohammad Mossadegh, the elected leader of Iran, nationalized his country's oil, deciding that Iranian oil, in fact, was for the Iranian people, not the British, the United States, at the behest of Britain, engineered a coup in 1953 to oust Mossadegh and replace him with the Shah, whose reign of terror over his people lasted for 25 years. Likewise, when a popular uprising in Iraq replaced the puppet monarchy with a nationalist government to 1958, headed by Abdul Karim Qasim, the response of the West was not to encourage this move towards self-determination in Iraq. Instead, the U.S. instigated another coup that would allow the Ba'ath Party to consolidate power, kill the backbone of Iraqi society, including a long list of individuals compiled by the CIA of intellectuals, progressives, nationalists, doctors, scientists, teachers, and ultimately would bring Saddam Hussein to power, who would brutalize his people with the blessing of the United States, and who would attack Iran also with the blessing, and many would say encouragement, of the United States. The U.S. first armed Iraq and then turned around and gave support and arms to Iran to ensure that neither gained the upper hand, and the fighting, the murder, and the inhumanity would continue as long as possible. Then the U.S. switched sides again, arming Saddam once more. They gave him the chemical weapons that were used to kill tens of thousands of Kurds and Iranians, and which would later be used as a pretext, called WMDs, to attack Iraq in the Second Gulf War. Over 1 million people were killed in the Iran-Iraq War, and far more than that perished in both Gulf Wars that were spaced out with 10 years of crippling sanctions. U.S. intervention in Iraq did not just target military installations, but the infrastructure of life, including roadways, nearly all electrical plants, sewage treatment, and water installations, such that Iraqi society continued to die of rampant disease and malnutrition long after falling bombs stopped killing them. An estimated 500,000 children under the age of 5 died as a result of sanctions alone. And in the vulgar arrogance we have come to know well, Madeleine Albright said that the death of those small lives was, quote, worth it. That arrogance was echoed recently by Hillary Clinton when she described the devastation of Libya and the murder of Gaddafi with an infantile soundbite of, quote, we came, we saw, he died, unquote, and she laughed. In fact, unlike the rosy narrative my opponent hinted at in his opening talk, intervention in Libya had nothing to do with humanitarian reasons. The ongoing killing, executions, and tribal infighting in Libya gives a lie to the notion that NATO intervened to prevent slaughter. Libya is now a NATO outpost plagued with tribal infighting, deteriorating basic services, which had been among the best in Africa, with free education, free healthcare, zero national debt, home ownership as a human right, free electricity, high literacy rate, high life expectancy. And with the largest oil reserves in Africa, Libya is now primed for rampant corporate looting. And what of Western intervention in Palestine? What does one call Western intervention when it allows a political movement born in Europe, supposedly under the auspices of none other than God, that proceeds to rape, pillage, murder, and steal home and heritage of the indigenous people of Palestine, and a long-standing campaign to erase Palestine from the map and destroy our ancient society as if it never was? This brief sampling of recent interventions in the Middle East by Western powers does not encapsulate the staggering human cost across our tortured region. One nation after another lay in tatters and ruin every time the West intervenes. Once high-functioning societies have been reduced to striving for mere survival. Why then would any Arab or Persian invite such a force into our midst? Are we so stripped of agency? The best we can imagine is to be saved by this power that so clearly holds our lives and our cultures in such contempt and such disrespect. Revolution must be one that ends the imperialist or colonial relationship between the native population and the oppressor or the exploiter. We have not run out of options in Syria, and these can be discussed in the Q&A session in the interest of time. But we should remember that the so-called international community is not merely the West. The world is full of nations and peoples with the kind of moral capital that comes from having fought and triumphed in anti-imperialist struggles, who can be asked to intervene with agendas of national reconciliation in deadlock situations where we might need outside help. The West and their clients are bereft of such moral capital, and their agenda has been proven repeatedly to always be counter to local nationalist aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very